Hey, what's up? This is part 15 of ClearBnB. We're rebuilding a short-term vacation rental marketplace using Ruby on Rails. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to actually get the dates for the reservation, how to book, how to make sure we don't have overlapping dates. I think we'll see how far we get with that. There is a gem called Validates Overlap. This is a pretty cool gem that we're going to play around with and use to validate our dates that are part of our reservation system. All right, so inside of our application, we have a link to a listing. We can click on the listing, and if we click on reserve, right now it just redirects us directly to checkout to pay for it. But that doesn't give us any opportunity to specify which dates we want to book. And so we need to be able to collect some sort of date thing. So what we're going to do is first we're going to change this from a button to a link. And instead of having it directly, like a form directly on the listing show page, we're going to create a new a reservation form for creating a new reservation. And that'll allow us to collect the start date and end date before we redirect. So first thing we're going to do is open up the listing show page, and we're going to move this form somewhere else. So we're going to say link to new reservation, or maybe reserve. We'll just use the same name, and we'll say new reservation path. And we need to include the ID of the listing so we know which listing we're booking. That makes sense. If we go back over to our reservations views here, we need to add new.html.arb, and we'll just paste that in there, and we're off to the races. So the two things we want to collect now are inputs for the type of date, and the name is going to be, reservation start date, not that stuff. And then for now, we'll just leave off the value, and whatever. We can come back and clean that up. End date. And we've got our listing ID. Okay, so now if we refresh this page, this is now a link. And this brings us to this page. We're seeing that the value for ID is nil. That's because we don't have our listing instance variable set up. Go to the reservations controller and add a new action here. And inside of this new action, we'll say grab the listing, and that's going to be finding the one by params ID. And I think we should be able to see the form now. Cool. So now if we click, we want to go from like the 10th to the 11th and click reserve. That will send a post request, but right now this is still just redirecting us directly to checkout, and we're not actually using that start date, end date in any way. So first thing we'll do is we'll permit those so that the start date and end date can come in with the reservation params. And then I think what we want to do is we sort of need to track when the listing is unavailable. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this in the vacation rental industry. There's actually like a lot of really complex ways that you can organize it. Like some people they'll have like a really big house, or they'll have a house that has like a house and then like a in-law suite. And sometimes they might book the in-law suite and the house part separately. And then other times they might have like a really big party that comes in and books the whole thing. So you might have like 3 different calendaring systems, and it can get really, really complex. Another wrench to throw in this whole thing is that you might have your listing synced out to lots of different platforms. So people could book your house on Airbnb or HomeAway or VRBO or Flipkey or TripAdvisor or Booking.com or like any of these. And each of those is going to have its own calendar. And so how do we make sure that we're keeping our calendars sort of in sync as people are booking and then maybe like canceling booking, so they're removing their booking? It can get super complex. What we're going to do is we're going to keep a simple model. And the model is going to be a calendar event model, Rails G model calendar event, and it's going to be related directly to the listing. And we're also going to say that this calendar event is going to have a status of either like reserved or manually blocked. So if you're a host and you need to do some maintenance or something, you might want to like just go in and block off parts of the calendar so that guests don't accidentally reserve it when you're like replacing the roof or something. So we'll have like a integer status for what this calendar event represents, whether it's just a blocked thing or a reserved because it's like booked. We also need a start date and an end date. And I'm storing these as actual date objects because I don't want to mess around with time zones. Technically, we could have like a check-in time and a checkout time, and maybe you have calendar events that are on the same day, but we're not going to build a whole calendar solution. We just need to know like when is the guest checking in? When are they checking out? When are things not available because we're doing maintenance or whatever? The calendar event is also going to like optionally be related to a reservation, because if the calendar event is because of a reservation, we want to be able to kind of like link the two together. So we'll say the reservation references, and this is going to be potentially null because if it's a calendar event that is just a block, there is no reservation that's related to it. So we need to make sure that we come in here and make this nullable. And we want the status to always be required. And we're not going to give it a default because we need to really be explicit about whether this is a blocked or a reservation. And then we can do like different validations based on that. We always need the start date. We always need the end date. So we're like requiring these things at the database level. Bin Rails DB migrate, and I've also got bundle exec annotate. I don't think we've done this in a while. Annotate dash models. I like this because it gives me the list of, the columns directly in the model object. Okay, so let's go over to our calendar event object. Belongs to reservation, and this is optional. Then we go to the reservation object, and the reservation object now has one calendar event, and that's dependent destroy, and it's also required because right now we're not storing the start and end date of a reservation in the actual reservation object itself. So we want to require that if we have a reservation, it has a related calendar event, and that's going to be where we store like the start and end date. And we might want to like delegate start date to the calendar event, and same thing with end date. What this will do is make it so that if we want to call like reservation.startDate, it'll just call it on the calendar event. So for instance, let's see if we can get this to work. So if we say like R is reservation.new, and I think this needs the listing.first, and it needs the guest, and that's going to be user.first, r.valid, r.errors. Calendar event can't be blank. Okay, so now we need to say like E is calendar event.new, reservation is R, listing is listing.first, and then we have a start date, and that's going to be date.new 2022, 310, and then end date is date.new 2022 311, e.valid. Okay, so that makes the calendar event valid, and we can say e.save. Oh, it needs a status. Why is it not? Oh, okay, you know what? Right, okay, so we need to add that validation here. Validates status, present's true, and we also need like our enum status, and this is going to be like booked or reserved or something, or wait, blocked. Yeah, reserved or blocked. Blocked means manually held by the host. Okay. So now we should have this event object. It expected a reservation, but it didn't get a reservation. R equals, let's recreate the reservation object, and then recreate the event object, e.valid. Status can't be blank, right? Okay, so then the event should have a status of reserved, and now it's valid. So e.save bang. Okay, cool. So we're committed. We're in the database. We have a calendar event, and R has, okay, so now the reservation also has an ID. that was also saved. So we inserted into reservations, then we inserted into calendar events. Cool. That is all good. And now we have a reservation. All of that was just to talk about like being able to say something like r.start date, and that gives us back the start date of the related calendar event. Now, there are a ton of things that we want to validate around the calendar event. So we want to make sure that like start date cannot fall after the end date. We also want to make sure that the start date or like that the dates don't overlap with other calendar events for this listing. We also want to validate that, yeah, the dates are in the future. So there's a few different things. So inside of, I guess we want to make sure that, yeah, they're present, validates okay, so inside of Rails 7, there was a new comparable thing that was added. So we should be able to say something like validates the start date compare less, or yeah, it's like less than end date. I think that's a thing. Reload C is calendar event dot last comparable validator. Okay, Rails 7 comparable comparison less than validates comparison. Oh, maybe it's just comparison. Comparable comparison. There we go. So C dot update end date. If we try to set the end date to date.new, like something before the start date, it should fail. Yeah, so that failed as expected. That's good. And if we try to create a brand new calendar event, C equals, if we try to create a brand new calendar event where the end date is before the start date, that should fail. Oh, we need to create a new reservation again. Okay. E.valid, and that should be false. E.errors. Okay, yeah. So if it failed, then we should get, yeah, start date must be less than 3.1 because that's the end date, whatever. All right, we also want to say that validates that the start date is inclusion in date.today through today plus 2 years. So this is gonna, okay, so start date can't fall after the end date. The dates must be in the future. Now we have to figure out that the dates don't overlap with other calendar events for this listing. And this is where the gem comes in to play, validates overlap. So we're gonna say bundle add validates overlap. And then the way that this gem works is you give it, you just validate that it ends at a certain thing, and we can say in the scope of the listing, of like the specific listing. So we're gonna say validates the start date and end date overlap given some query thing. So let's go back into the calendar event, and here we wanna say validates start date, end date, overlap. In the scope of the listing, we wanna say that this is already, it's already booked for this date range if that happens. So we already have a calendar event. Actually, I think I have to exit and reload because we added a gem. So now if we say like create a new reservation. Also, when you're in the Rails console, you can do Control-R, and this gives you reverse search inside of here. This also works in the terminal, but in case you're looking for a previous command that you ran, instead of having to say like up, 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 and then like counting like, oh, is it 12 up or 13 up, or I don't know. Let's see, so C equals, okay. So we're gonna try to create a calendar event that is going to start on, well, let's Yeah, so this should fail because this is in the past. So let's try that. C.valid, C.errors.full messages. Start date is not included in the list. That's a little bit confusing. I wonder if we can say message, yeah, must be in the future. There, I just said don't do it, and then I did it. Valid or show me the full messages. Okay, start date must be in the future. That looks great. Okay, and then if we try to create a calendar event where, okay, well, let's create one that is in the future. So May 3rd to May 5th, and C.valid. Okay, so this is valid. Okay, great. Now let's see C.save bang. Okay, that's saved in the database. So now we have an event that is May 3rd to May 5th. So calendar event.last. So this is from the start date is May 3rd and the end date is May 5th. So now what we want to do is check to see if the oh, I notice it doesn't have a reservation ID, but we're like creating a reservation and passing that in. I don't know. That's weird. Okay. Let's see. Oh, right. Status is blocked. Whatever. So we should not be able to save a new reservation for the same exact dates. C.valid. That should be false. And it says start date is already booked for this date range. Okay, that's a pretty good message. Okay. So then if we try to do it where it just overlaps a little bit, where we're like, maybe we're going from May 4th to May 6th, just to like make sure that it works on like different days, C.valid, and okay, so it's already booked for that date range. And is there another thing here that lets us do, okay, so let's see if we can check in on the same day that someone else is checking out. So someone is checking out on 5/5, can we check in on 5/5? No, we cannot. So we want that to be explicitly less than instead of overlapping with, like in practice, it should be possible, depending on your settings, for someone to check out in the morning and then you clean it and get the house ready and then someone checks out in the evening. And so I wonder if this overlap thing allows us to specify a shift. Oh. Start shift and end shift. I wonder, Oh, exclude edges. Got it. Okay, so we want to exclude the edges. This is how you do it. Okay, so you say exclude edges. And then we pass in start date, maybe? I don't know. Let's see. Let's see if that works as expected. Okay. Start date is already booked for this range. Maybe we need both. I don't know. Let's see. We really got to get test suite set up here so that we can do this. Oh, nice. Okay. So now we have two calendar events, start date and listing ID. Okay, so we have three calendar events. One is from March 10 to March 11. The other one is the 3rd to the 5th and the 5th to the 6th. So let's just make sure that we didn't break this and we can't go from like the 5th to the 7th, or maybe let's go the 2nd. Yeah, from the 2nd to the 4th or something. Okay, good. Start date is already booked for this range. Okay, cool. So okay. I think our overlaps are working as expected. Ideally, we write tests for this, but we haven't added any testing yet. So we're just gonna keep rocking it like this. But we've got some good validation now. Whew. All right, let's head over to the controller. So reservations controller. Inside of here, we now have, we have this new action. And inside of our create, if you look at our create method, this thing is pretty massive. It is, it doesn't even fit on the screen, and we are creating a checkout session and doing a ton of stuff with the checkout session. Now we need to sort of validate the event data for the calendar event. We need to validate the reservation. We have like the guest to figure out. We have like a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. So what I want to do is, instead of just keeping everything in the controller or moving it down to the model, I'm going to create a separate object here. It's just going to be a plain old model, like a plain old Ruby model, and we're going to call it like book listing or something .rb, and this is just going to be an object that is responsible for handling all of those incoming params. I don't know why I named it uppercase like that. Spending too much time in C# over here. All right. All right, so book listing, class book listing doesn't inherit from anything, and it's going to take in the listing ID, I guess. Or no, we want to take in all the params, and we also need to take in the current user. So we'll say current user params. We'll make those adder readers, and now we have something we can play around with. Inside of the params, we'll have the listing ID, and we're also going to have, I guess we're going to have the start date, and we're going to have the end date. And is there anything else we're going to have as part of the params that are coming in? Listing, start date, end date, and we have the current user. Okay, so now let's start peeling these off. I'm actually going to make another getter for the listing, and this is going to be like at listing is listing.find, and we need to make a method for the reservation. And I'm using this style where it's like creating an instance variable or equals. That's called memoization. And all that we're really doing with that is making sure that if we call these methods multiple times, we're not creating multiple objects. So I will create a reservation, and then we also need to create the calendar event. So at calendar event is calendarEvent.new. So the calendar event again requires that we pass in the status of reserved. We have the start date, end date, the listing, and in this case, we're also going to have a reservation, and that's going to be this reservation here. And okay, let's just look at the calendar event really quick, just to make sure we're passing everything in. So we've got a listing, we've got our reservation, we've got our status, our start date and end date. Okay, that's looking good. We'll go to our reservation, and we have the listing. We also need the guest. That's going to be the current user. And we're not going to pass a start and end date because it's going to have a calendar event now. And the session ID is going to be created later, but that's not strictly required yet. So it's going to start off without it, and that's fine. And then this is going to start off with the status of pending and then sort of work its way up as it goes through the booking process. Okay, I think that's good. So we are pulling off, we're pulling off the params. I think I might put these down here under something like private, make all these private, and then we'll just expose the reservation in the calendar event on this book listing object. And what I like to do is make a valid method, and this is going to say like, is the calendar event valid and the reservation valid? And if it is, cool. If it's not, then we want to have some sort of errors. And I actually want to validate both, I think. Yeah. So then we'll have like errors, and this is going to be a combination of like calendar event.errors and reservation errors. I don't think this merge thing is going to work, but whatever, we'll just play with it for now. And then I also want some sort of like save method that saves the calendar event and the reservation. All right, also right here, before we actually save these other things, we only want to do this if this is valid. And let's go to the reservations controller and start with that and see if we can refactor into using this new booking thing. So at book booking is like book listing.new, current user, and the reservation params. And now what we're going to do is just comment all this other stuff out and say like if at booking.save, then for now we'll just like render JSON of like, yeah, sure, else end. And if it fails, flash.now errors is going to be at booking.errors.full messages, and then we're going to re-render new. Okay. Whew. All right, we went through a lot there and we haven't tested anything yet. So let's go over to our controller here and go back to reserve, and we'll just start plucking around on some dates, the 21st to the 22nd, and click on reserve. Class, oh yeah, what is this? What is this craziness? What happened? Did book listing end up? Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't know how that ended up as a real thing. Okay. Unknown validator overlap. That's because we haven't restarted our server since we installed that gem. All right, we got a success message back. Let's see. Reservation.last is pending, and it was just created, and calendar event. Okay, and we have a reservation, or it says reserved. We've got our listing ID. We've got our reservation ID. All those look good. I just thought of something, like maybe on the calendar event, we also want to make sure that the listing that is reserved is the same as the listing that the calendar event's for. Whatever, like that is definitely a good validation to have, but it's whatever. Well, we can write that later. Okay, so now what we want to do is, now that we've got this like book listing thing, we want to create a checkout session for Stripe and redirect, right? So inside of the reservations controller, I'm just going to copy all of this stuff that's sort of commented out, at least down to here, and then put that inside of book listing. So I'm going to make a new thing down here called checkout session, and I'm just going to plop all of this stuff in here. And then we're going to go through it a little bit carefully, not super carefully, and see what it does. Okay. Similar to the other methods here, I'm going to memoize the checkout session. So I'm going to say at checkout session or equals. This is going to make an API call out to Stripe to create this checkout session object. Again, the checkout session represents sort of like what the customer is going to see when they go through the checkout flow. And then we'll say like return checkout session. If checkout session, this is an alternative way. I guess, yeah, we don't want to actually do this part. This is an alternative to doing the or equals thing, because we also need to use the new checkout session down here to update our reservation. So yeah, this will now be at checkout session ID. And then we just want to return the whole checkout session. All right, so let's look at all of this stuff. So the reservation URL, let's use the reservation instead of the instance variable for that. Okay, we've got our price data. We have our metadata. Okay, so now that we have a little bit more context, I want to include in our metadata the listing ID and the guest ID. And I want to include the start date and the end date because those are, it's just like super nice to have that inside of Stripe on our Stripe objects in case we need to have like some sort of, I don't know, data migration to fix anything or whatever, or we need to look anything up. We can look up by like start and end date or guest ID or whatever. So I'm putting it in both the metadata for the checkout session and the metadata for the payment intent, so that when we're looking up payment intents later, we can see who booked it, where, like what they booked and all of this. So it's nice to be able to put it on both the checkout session and on the payment intent for our fulfillment processing later. The other thing that we want to do here is this is going to be sort of the number of nights. So if someone books for like one night, sure, we want to charge them the nightly price for that one night. But if they book 10 nights, we want to charge them 10 times that, nightly rate. So let's go, okay, back into our reservations controller here. We need some way to like actually redirect to that checkout page. So we're going to say redirect to the @booking.checkout URL. Checkout, yeah, we'll just call it checkout URL. And this is going to be like allow other hosts true, and then status is going to be see other, and that will allow us to sort of just like safely redirect. All right, let's see how far we got. So we'll go back to listings, cabin in the woods. We want to reserve it for, I don't know, the 28th to the 30th. We click reserve. Undefined checkout URL. Right, we didn't do that, did we? So checkout URL should be pretty simple. Checkout URL is going to be checkout session.url. We can't just refresh because our dates are going to be taken. Oh, and we've got to, okay, so we got to figure this out too, our errors. So CalendarEvent.errors.merge reservation.errors. So the CalendarEvent.errors object is this active model errors thing, and it doesn't have the method merge, which is super annoying. I don't know why they do that. Like, I'm sure it's because it would be confusing to not know like which object it was about, but gosh, it's kind of, frustrating. So merging active model errors. A merge. Okay, so there's a merge bang method. Okay. Let's see. Merge bang. Does that work? Okay. It gave us back nothing. That's calendar event errors dot merge bang with reservation errors. Why is that giving us the empty array back? Reservation errors is empty. I don't know. Let's just try merge bang. I don't know. Like, and then I'm assuming that's going to like update the underlying ones, but it's not giving us back an error object. This is annoying. Okay, well, let's just concatenate the messages. So calendar event errors.full messages plus reservation.errors.full messages. And okay, whatever. This will be fine. Okay. Right now our reservation thing is wrong because there's no full messages method. Okay, undefined method ID for nil class. So in the case that we're re-rendering new here, we need reference to the listing. So now we need to say something like @listing is booking.listing or listing.new. I don't know, like it better have this. If it doesn't, then we have some other problems. @reservation is @booking.reservation. And we should probably say like, oh, I don't know, whatever. This is fine. Yeah. Private method listing called. Of course that was going to bite me, huh? Okay, yeah, we'll just scoot you up a little bit. Sure. All right, so we're going from there to there. Nope, it has to be in the 4.4 to 4.6, reserve. Undefined method reservation URL for book listing. So what we want to do is we want to include rails.application.routes.url helpers so that we can use that inside of our controller. And we need to pick some new dates. So the 18th to the 20th, reserve. Okay, so we got some errors that are happening, but they're not showing because our reservation show page doesn't actually render, or maybe our layout doesn't render the errors, or we have like some shared errors thing. Yeah, okay. Okay, listings, reserve, pick some dates. I don't know, 19th to the 20th. Reserve. Hey, look at that. Okay, so we are redirected here. We can go through the whole process, click pay. That should create a reservation, a calendar event, like all the booking stuff. And we got back here. Oh, you know what? We put this in the wrong thing. Undefined method render partial. Reservation new. Render, what? Oh, render, and then it's partial like this. Gosh, I think, yeah, okay. Okay. And we can see okay, cool. So now we can see the JSON spit out, but we're missing a payment intent ID. I'm not sure what's up with that. So did we receive the checkout session completed event? And did we handle that in the webhook handler? And it looks like maybe okay, here's the webhooks controller. It's handling this event. And we see, what do we see? What do we see? Okay, are there any events that are hanging out? So rescue web? No. What is this again? Jobs, /jobs. Okay, none of the jobs failed. So we should expect to see that our reservations /18 has the payment intent ID, unless the event failed. So let's see if this works. So let's go log into Stripe and take a look at our events. Go to the developers tab. We want to go to our events. We want to find checkout session completed, and it should have been delivered here, and it looks like it was. Okay, and then why wasn't it processed? I don't know. Let's see. So, all right. All right, here's the event. It's coming in. It's a post to this controller. And we're inserting into events, and then we should be processing that in the background later. So that committed. Then we enqueued a job. We have this, the job is event 55. And that job should have processed this thing. Okay, so then if we go into our events objects, so event.last, so event.pluck status. Okay, so it looks like one of them failed. So event.where or find 55. Okay, message failed. Unknown validator overlap valid. Oh, okay, cool. So this failed because this is great. This is great. So our event model, we found the event that was supposed to update the payment intent ID on this checkout session, right? This is supposed to be filled in. But when we received the webhook notification from Stripe, we had not restarted our event processing in the background, which is required since we installed a new gem that is now being used as part of the validation, that is the result of the fulfillment, that is part of the webhook, whatever. So we need to kill our rescue worker here and restart it. So that rake rescue work was using an old version of the app where we didn't have that validator installed. And then what we need to do is we need to find this event, and I think we have like a process job or something. Like, let's see. Event job, so event job.perform, and yeah, so we can say, maybe we can say like event job.perform now, and we pass in the event, and it says true, And now we can look at the event again. And now it says processed. So now we would expect that the ID is set here. The payment intent ID is set when we refresh. Boom, it is. That's why I love this model for storing off all the events, any errors that happened with them, and then the statuses of the events, because we didn't have to like go to Stripe and retry the event and have it resent or kind of like have to recover too much. We're able to just like find those failed events and then replay the processing, and that sort of recovers for us, which is nice. Okay, but when you're looking at this JSON, you don't actually see the start and end date. We see a created at, updated at. So there's another little trick here that we're going to do. So inside of the reservation show page, what I'm going to do is, as part of this as JSON method, you can pass in include and then an association, and that'll render the JSON for the nested association. So calendar event here. And now if we refresh the page, we see the calendar event and its related data that's like nested underneath it. That's like amazing and super helpful. So now we can see our start date and our end date. That's cool. So 3/19 to 3/20 is booked for Cabin in the Woods. Let's go try to book that and see what happens. If we book like the same dates, right? So if we try to go from like the 18th to the, I don't know, the 21st or something, let's try to reserve that long weekend. Start date is already booked for this date range. Cool. We should, however, be able to check in on the 20th and then check out on like the 21st, I think. So if we try that, then we are redirected to checkout. We see this Cabin in the Woods thing. But let's work on now making it so that when we book for multiple days, we pass in the quantity here as expected. So what I want to do is go to the actually I want to go to the calendar event first, and let's make a method here called like nights or something. And this is going to be like, yeah, start date to end date dot count. And I think, do we want it inclusive? Calendar event dot last dot nights is 2 nights. Calendar event dot last was the 21st to the 22nd. So we don't want it to be inclusive. We want to have just another dot here. And that should be a 1 night stay. Good. And then the other thing we want to do is let's just go to the reservation and delegate nights out to the calendar event. And then that way from our book listing thing here, we should be able to just say like reservation.nights, and that will give us a quantity. So now if we go back to here and we say we want to reserve this, and we're going to go to like May, and we want to reserve it from the 22nd to the 28th. So the 22nd to the 28th should be like 6 nights, right? So there's going to be like, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nights. We check out on the 28th. So it should be 6 times the nightly rate, which I think is 200. So 1,200 plus 120 for the cleaning fee. So it should be like 1,320. Boom, 1,320. Okay. And you see how many nights here it is, quantity 6. That is beautiful. That's exactly what we want. We also see the cleaning fee here. So this is great. This is super cool. All right, what other stuff might we want to do with the date ranges? Well, before we go too far, let's just like look at the checkout session object a little bit more, because there's a couple other things we might want to do here. Okay, so when we create a checkout session, we're setting the mode to payment. We got our success URL, client reference ID, customer email, blah, blah, blah. Actually, are we passing? Yeah, okay, so every user becomes a Stripe customer. That's good, yep. And then for our line items, we're passing in price data. So we're dynamically creating the price data for this. And as we do that, we should be able to also set product data. Let's see. Nope, okay. I thought we could set the unit amount, but maybe not. Or like the unit name. I might be mistaken. Okay. Adjustable quantity, no. Dynamic tax rates. I guess we could try to figure out the tax rates situation, but for now this is fine. Okay. Oh, payment method types. We are not specifying that, right? We do not want to pass payment method types because we want to use automatic payment methods, which is much better. All right, what else do we have? After expiration, right? So what we can do is we can expire a checkout session. So like, let's say someone starts booking and then they leave their browser open for a few hours while they're talking to their family and trying to figure out if they want to book. And then someone else comes in and books the same dates. We shouldn't let someone check out for the same exact dates. So we'll come back. I think that's a feature we can add in another episode. Allow promo codes. This is pretty easy. Let's do that. So let's just add, allow promotion codes. And that's going to be true. Submit type. Okay, so for our submit type, did we already switch that to book? No, okay. So because by default, where do we go? By default, it says pay down here, but we can switch that out so that it says book instead by changing the submit type. Submit type is now book. We don't need any shipping options, setup intent, payment. Okay, so at this point, I think we're looking pretty good and we can accept payments. Let's go back through the flow one more time. All right, let's go through for the 27th to the 29th. All right, now as we're checking out, we can see that it's 2 nights, 200 each. If we want, we can add a promo code. We haven't set any up yet, but we could add that. And now we're able to check out just fine. And we can see, now we see it says book for. So that's like, it's super nice and convenient workflow. Let's go through the booking flow one more time. And just make sure that we do get a payment intent on our checkout or on our reservation when we were redirected back. And we have no payment intent yet, but we should get one okay, cool. It was processed. Now we have this and it was reserved. We got this booked status. The calendar event is reserved. It has a related reservation, which is this one. Okay, I'm feeling good that we have like some sort of reservations flowing now and dates, and we should be able to build a calendar. We should be able to build like a search tool where you can filter by dates and location and find different listings. So we're like a little bit closer, and I hope this was useful and fun to watch. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.